or at George Mason University. So I'll just give you a little background on Zika. So Zika was first identified in rhesus monkeys in 1947 in the country of Uganda, and it was then identified in 1952 in humans. And Zika is spread by the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, and these mosquitoes are also known for spreading diseases like chikungunya and dengue. So the main two concerns for Zika was that there is a high risk of microcephaly in a child of a woman if she contracted the disease when she was pregnant. And there's also a high risk for the Guillain-Barré disease, which can result in paraplegia. So how do we solve these problems? We turn to mathematical models, and I'm just going to give a little background. So Kermack and McKendrick were pioneers in the disease dynamics field, and they created what is known as the SIR compartmental model. And this model basically consists of three compartments. The susceptible compartment, which describes all the people that have the potential to contract the disease. The infected compartment, which describes the people who have just contracted the disease, and then the recovered compartment, which describes people that have gone through treatment or quarantine and have recovered from the disease. So Kermack and McKendrick also found this value called the basic reproductive number, also known as R naught. And this number basically tells us whether or not the epidemic is going to exist. If that R naught value is greater than 1, then the epidemic will continue to thrive and grow, which in this case is not what we want. And if the R naught value is less than 1, then it will cease to exist. So when we talk about different diseases, we talk about how they affect people in different ways, and for that reason we have different mathematical models for them. So for example, the SIS model that you can see up there is an example of what a model for a sexually transmitted disease like chlamydia or gonorrhea would look like. So you see people moving from the susceptible class to the infected class and not recovering, but just going back to the susceptible class. Similarly, we can make other adaptations to the SIR model and by adding in an exposed phase in which we can talk about the incubation period that the virus is in the human's body. So when we talk about Zika, we know that Zika is a vector-borne disease. So we start with our uninfected mosquito, which is our vector. And once the uninfected mosquito bites an infected host, the virus starts to replicate in its body. And so now the virus goes through this incubation period, which we represent by the exposed phase on the bottom compartmental model, which is representing the mosquitoes. So once it passes the exposed phase, it then becomes an infected mosquito. So now, once this infected mosquito goes and bites a susceptible human, the human goes through a similar phase by going through the incubation period and then becoming an infected human. However, the humans, once they're infected, they soon become, they move into the recovered class. So the mosquitoes, as you notice, they don't have the R in their model, which means that they die shortly after they become infected. So some things that we have done over the summer is we have looked at many of these aspects that we can kind of add to the current Zika models that are floating around. So we not only looked at vector transmission, but we also looked at sexual transmission, which, as we now know from the past few months, the disease can be transmitted both from male to female and female to male. And we also looked at two different possible infectious classes. Once the person moves from a susceptible to exposed, there's a proportion of people that either move to the symptomatic infectious or the asymptomatic infectious. And then another enhancement that we were looking at was preventative measures, which if any of you strapped on my poster earlier, that was what it was about. The two preventative measures that we looked at were ITNs, which is insecticide-treated bed nets, and IRS, which is indoor residual spraying. So these factors can really deplete the mosquito population, and that in a way can help us reduce the amount of Zika that's floating everywhere. And one of the last things that we looked at was how Zika would affect people during large sporting events such as the Olympics, which studies have shown that there's an increase in sexually transmitted diseases. So we wanted to see So in summary, we were looking at, just for the assumptions, we were looking at two different causes of infections, and we were looking at both vector and sexual contact. And since we're talking about the Olympics, we're assuming that in that 30-day period, that people or the vectors are not migrating anywhere, and that the people, the humans, are not going to die by natural or disease causes, even though the mosquitoes we have said will die. So this is one of the models that was started with in the beginning. So you can see there's a term B sub MH IM. That term basically describes the interaction between our infected mosquito on the bottom mosquito compartment to the susceptible human on the top. So that term is made of a biting rate that we have from certain sources, and then a transmission rate of the disease from a mosquito to a human. We also have the sexual component, in which we're moving from the susceptible to the exposed, which we have that term A sub H. That describes the sexual transmission. And from the exposed, people have a choice, a biological choice, that either they can choose to move to the symptomatic or the asymptomatic, and then soon they recover. So, this is the model that we're working with right now. So once we took that model from before, we were working with only one group of humans, and we were working with one population of mosquitoes. Here, since we're working with the Olympics, we picked three specific groups of human subpopulations, which were visitors to Rio, and then natives of Rio, and then a group of sex workers in Rio. So these 5 equations were very similar to the 5 human equations that we saw before. However, the summation term lets us know that these people in all the subpopulations are sexually interacting with any of the other 2 groups. We also have a preferred mixing probability in the A sub H term called P sub Hj. And this term is basically described by a proportion of people who want to mix in their own group, and then the remaining proportion who want to mix with other 2 groups. So this describes the vector model that we had. And again, it's very similar to the one that we had before. However, now the summation term lets us know that now the mosquitoes can get infected by any of the 3 populations of people. So once we had our model, we were able to derive what's called the basic reproductive number. This number basically is the average number of secondary infections that occur when one infectious person enters a room of susceptible people. So we were able to derive this using what is called the next generation matrix approach. And what we did is that F matrix you see over there is the Jacobian matrix of the new infections that are solely going into the exposed class. And then the V matrix is the Jacobian of the outflow of those infections. So the approach basically states that you should go through this process by finding the F matrix and the V matrix, and then we find the next generation matrix, FV inverse. And then from that, we can find the dominant eigenvalue of that matrix, and that is what is known as R naught. For simplicity reasons, we have taken only vector transmission because sexual contact made it a whole lot more complicated. So we were looking at the R naught squared term that we have over here, and what we found is that it's a collective sum of the average number of secondary asymptomatic infections and an average number of secondary symptomatic infections. So here, this is another derivation that we were able to do. We were able to find what is known as the final size relation. And this is basically the relationship between our R naught value and the size of our epidemic. So here, as you can see, the first 2 steps, we took our human equations. We were able to add the first 4. Looking at the sum, then we integrated that, and then we were able to find that term that you see over there. And then we were able to employ the method of separation of variables for the first equation that you see on the top. And from that, we were able to find what is known as the final size relation for this particular aspect. So these were some of the parameters that we had for our model, and these will help us in the future with actually calculating our R0 values and like an actual value for our final size relation, which will be super exciting. Obviously for the R0, what we want to do is we want to keep our parameters such that we have an R0 value of less than 1, which means that we have succeeded in reducing the spread of the zika virus. So this is one of the simulations that we did. This is just showing how in that 30-period time frame for the Olympics, how many natives were infected, how many visitors were infected. And the graph on the far right shows the number of infected vectors for in each of them. So we have that graph. So the future work it's very exciting. We want to add optimal control and looking at educational campaigns, and we also want to numerically solve the final size relation, and we also want to find an actual numerical value for the R0 value. Since microcephaly is a very dangerous condition, we want to try to prevent that from happening. So we're also thinking of incorporating pregnant females as a human subpopulation for this model. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for the speaker?
Yeah.
Did your model predict outbreak of transmission during the Olympics?
So when we were doing it, we didn't have exact data for the Olympics itself, but we were able to find in these simulations, we have a lot more, but this is just one case of the ones that we had. But we were able to kind of find, we were able to use like the concept that about 61% of the visitors that came would be in the ages of 18 to 44. And so that number was the number that we were using for our visitor number. And then we used a similar number for the natives of Rio because we wanted to kind of make sure that it made sense for both vector and sexual transmission. So we were able to kind of get to a point where we're able to model and simulate what will and what was happening during the Olympics, but not exact because we didn't have all the data.
Well, that was my follow-up question. Is that it'd be nice to compare your model prediction against being even anecdotal evidence, whether there was an outbreak or not.
Yeah, so that's what we're working on right now.
Any more questions?